if you do have a problem, how do you really defend what you're doing? So I think that's number one. From a regulatory standpoint, I think that's the reality. The other thing is, look, it's an environment where the regulations, financial reform, they don't even know what the regulations are going to be. I mean, they threw out these large guidance that ultimately it's going to be adopted, and you don't know what that's going to look like. And so really, from a financial services standpoint, I don't know how they're going to do it otherwise. I mean, they're going to have to figure out a way to build a dynamic environment, a platform that will allow them to focus on, as the rules come into place, how am I going to address for each of those? You look at pharmaceutical industry, I mean, this whole issue around healthcare practitioners and the payments, I mean, that's a big issue for them. And they just can't cut that off. That's an important source of funding for research, et cetera. So they've got to figure out a way to monitor it. And then on the off-label promotion issue, about 6 months ago, we got calls from 4 or 5 law firms that are representing pharma companies. DOJ basically went to the pharma companies and said, hey, look, we've profiled your data. And it looks to us like there's some strange patterns here in terms of geographies and medications that are being prescribed. And we're wondering, what are your practices in terms of marketing and selling these? So it's happening in the Medicaid space. A number of states have implemented very sophisticated analytic tools. And so it's hard for business not to respond when the government can come and say, look, we've done the analysis. Tell us where we're wrong to not leverage sophisticated solutions. It's almost, do it at your own risk if you don't do it. And I guess my advice is, if you're an organization that's already leveraged technology for some of these other areas, you just need to focus on it to turn it a different way and focus on the risk piece. I don't know how quickly that will become a big issue, but I think it makes sense to do it. It's a big cost avoidance, as a number of companies know that have been through that. Any other questions? Yes. No.
Jim, you said something that I just wanted to make sure that you highlight to what is your advice? Meaning, seems that you were saying that in certain cases, I don't know if it's certain cases or all cases, the approach to implement CA would be to really get the business unit or some other unit to get the tools in place and then you piggyback on it.
Yeah.
But what happens if the organization doesn't have the tools?
No, that's right.
What would you do?
Yeah, and I think, a big disclaimer on that is it depends on what your internal audit department's focus is. So there are a number of internal audit departments that still do a lot of performance audits because they're looking to, provide feedback to the business to help improve performance. If it's really an assurance function, and I deal with internal audit departments where SOX testing is not an internal audit, it's outside. Some where it's in, right? And so if you're looking at that, absolutely, from an assurance standpoint, that's a different objective. And it's still important to management, and you'd want to get their buy-in. It's just the same argument spun differently. But you're right. The easiest way to go is to leverage what management has done. But you shouldn't stay on the sidelines if management's done nothing. I mean, we've talked a lot today about leveraging analytics. Again, there are inexpensive business intelligence tools that you can use to start to profile data that gives you a perspective to say, okay, at least now I know here are some areas where I want to monitor transactions. Now let me deploy a more sophisticated tool, more detailed tool around monitoring transactions. There's at least a method to that, right? So I think you really have to see what's the purpose of internal audit, what are their areas of responsibility, and I agree, you shouldn't wait for management to do it. However, if you're struggling with the budget, the resources, we're seeing internal audit departments try to be more value creators, change agents for the organization, and if they have that license, that message has resonated with management to say, you know what, we agree, we'll help support that initiative financially. And maybe by lending, IT staff from the IT department to help get this thing going so you don't have to go and hire your own IT auditors. Yes?
Last question.
In your scenario 3 where you talked about internal audit playing a role where they are developing a continuous assurance methodology and then they roll it off to management.
Right.
What do you see as internal audit's relationship to that business process once that handoff has happened?
Right.
So for instance, if I, as internal audit, develop a P2P continuous monitoring program.
Right.
What happens a few years later when it's time for us to audit that? Is
Excellent
there
question.
an independence problem?
Yeah, thanks. And I get that question from time to time. Hey, how, are we impairing our independence because we've designed a business process that we're then going to audit? And I think the real answer there is, listen, there's shades of gray. It comes down to how you're partnering with the business. And I'm not suggesting that you design a process. But right now, for years it's been happening where internal audit runs an analytic using ACL or ID, et cetera. They throw it over the wall to management and say, hey, you ought to think about implementing this. And management goes to try to implement it in their own environment. What I'm suggesting is perhaps management doesn't have an efficient environment to do that. There are more efficient ways to do that with some of the applications that we've heard about today. Why not pilot it from an internal audit standpoint? Ultimately, when I say it's going to be owned and operated by the business, they're going to have to take that on and work that into their business process, right? But you can get it started. You can say, hey, look, here are 5 or 10 analytics that are important from an internal audit standpoint that we think will create value for you, the business. We've got it started. It's mapped to the data. You don't have to worry about doing that. We've got a base set of analytics. Now you need to take it and integrate it into your business process and then look to enhance what we've already done. So you're right. You're not designing business processes, but you are designing a CA environment that ultimately can be handed off for them to take and adapt and operate as CM. And the added or ancillary benefit is that you now have kind of your CA piece to continue to work from an internal audit standpoint. But it's a good question. I get that a lot. It's a fine line. There's no black or white answer, but you do have to be careful of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.